always a worry, as if the planet cannot feed or cope with the population as it stands, as it appears to grow. And yet, at this point, shall we say, at this turning point in history, many, shall we say, want to complete that cycle of events. So it is necessary for a huge population to occur. And as, shall we say, the turning point arrives, the population naturally will begin to decrease, and shall we say, with it, so many of the possibilities, so many, shall we say, of the old school go with it, because, shall we say, the population that everyone is complaining about is necessary in order to support the old systems. Does that answer the question? So the population then is of little consequence after our changing point. You understand? So it is already beginning to decline.
The population?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
So you think that it is a problem to feed it, yet that is not the problem of the feed, it is the problem of the, shall we call it, the the political assignments across the planet, as it were. So you understand, so much is occurring in the final conclusions. And like so many things, humans fear most of all letting go of the physical reality, as if somehow passing into the outer dimensions is somehow less important, less valuable than being in physicality. And yet, as I have pointed out, waking up is from the illusions. So the physical reality as it appears, when one is not attached to things as such,
or people,
becomes, of course, then everything becomes clarified. One creates reality. That is the fundamental patterns. And that is of so much importance.
So with the saying that it's starting to decline, so have we already reached our peak population of the planet?
That is correct.
Okay.
It is difficult, of course, to decide on that, because, of course, one would have to count them. And that is not what occurs. There is political gain in holding out that there is an endless increase of the wrong sort of people. But it is simply political gain. It is a way of influencing others in order to maintain the systems as they stand.
Okay. So a lot of people attribute the number of humans on this planet as to being one of our biggest problems or challenges on the planet. Is that the case, or is it more how we live or our thoughts and
Shall we-
ideas.
Shall we say this? The problem is that many of those that have been alive for a long time are gaining access to the very technology that is causing the destruction of the planet. You understand? So it is not the numbers, of course, but it is the style. It is the way in which humans have been organized by the higher elites. Do you understand? It is a problem of lacking of spiritual vision. There is always been plenty for everybody. That is why the physical reality was described as the Garden of Eden, a place for everyone. But what occurred, of course, was accumulation. That is more for me and less for you. And so that causes dissatisfaction, causes wars, and then you end up in the positions that you are in. And once the timing occurs, once, shall we say, the understanding of consciousness gains popularity, that is, if one begins to see it as it is, then, shall we say, there is a general withdrawal and an awakening to the nature of consciousness. So many people think this is some sort of miracle, some sort of out-of-body experience, but it is simply the awakening to truth. And truth has always remained as it is. That is, the laws have always applied. And consciousness has always been available to perceive what is. And so it has always been the case that one creates one's experience, even if one is unaware of it.
So with the perceived issue of population, many do fear that we're going to have a mass depopulation or potentially a series of events. Is that something we should put any energy into, or is that just what it is, fear?
The population will decline. Only because there is no longer a necessary purpose for incarnating at this period in time. And the new incarnations, as they occur, begin to perceive the world in a different set of order. So it is less necessary, and shall we say, the greatest fear of all, of course, is one loses one's identity. That is, one loses, first of all, my group, as it were. That is, my nationhood, my shall we say, my racial prejudices and all of such things. One is always moving towards, shall we say, a unity of all. That is not to say one loses, shall we say, the cultural differences, but one integrates the greatest values that have been actuated in human terms. Does this make some sort of sense? Because one always has to look at it from the widest perspective as unity and integration begins to take a greater position in the affairs of humankind.
Yeah.
You understand? Otherwise, there is always the chance of more and more conflict. And that is what has occurred in every case. There is, shall we say, an attempt to eliminate groups of people for various qualities. Either one is the wrong color, one is the wrong religious outlook, one is the wrong gender, one is all of these different things. An attempt by others to eliminate it for fear of it infiltrating one's field, as it were. That is the personal field, the family field, the social field, the community fields, and so on. So there is always an idea that somehow purity of individuality is more important to keep in place. And it is not just on one side of the fence.